putting on my other hat, it now gives me very, very great pleasure indeed to introduce as our last speaker my dear colleague, Dr. Kelly Rudolph, Assistant Professor of Classics here at Grand Valley State University. She joins us here in her first year, having completed first an undergraduate degree at Princeton University and her PhD at the University of Cambridge. And her talk today is entitled Learning from Plato's Hippias Minor. Professor Rudolph.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction, and thank you to the Hauenstein Institute for organizing this and bringing us here. Woodrow Wilson, in his 1896 commemorative address at Princeton University, expressed these sentiments. What you cannot find a substitute for is the classics as literature. Your enlightenment depends upon the company you keep. You do not know the world until you know the men who have possessed it and tried its ways before ever you were given your brief run upon it. And there is no sanity comparable with that which is schooled in the thoughts that will keep. At a conference I attended in Glasgow 2 weeks ago, Tam Dalyell, a retired Scottish Labour politician, praised the study of Antiquity for the quality of mind it instills in all who study it. He drew numerous examples from his experience over 35 years in the British Parliament with his classically trained colleagues. What do these two men, one writing and speaking in 1896 and the other in 2009, what do they mean when they say that we have something to learn from classics, from antiquity? Nowadays, we usually express such sentiments in the language of utility or transferable skills, that somehow contact with the ancient world, reading the great works of Plato, Aristotle, Thucydides, Demosthenes, Cicero, teach us something we can learn nowhere else. What lessons does antiquity have to teach us? We've heard some answers here this morning. Things about analogies that we can draw from historical, political, cultural, philosophical texts. We've talked about role models, characteristics that we would like Obama to emulate. But I want to approach this all from a slightly different perspective. In doing so, I turn to a little studied dialogue of Plato, a very short one called the Hippias Minor. It's considered alongside the Apology, the Crito, the Euthyphro, among others, to be one of the earlier dialogues. Like them, it ends in aporia, a state of perplexity. Only this time it is Socrates himself who is perplexed when he comes to the end of his own argument and finds that he has argued that the intentional teller of lies is a better man than the one who tells falsehoods involuntarily. We will not get into the philosophical details of the Hippias Minor today, but I do want to look at the point at which Socrates departs on this long discussion. And it starts with the question to Hippias, which Homeric hero is the best, Odysseus or Achilles? I highly recommend this as an essay topic for undergraduates. They really like to talk about this. His interlocutor in this dialogue is Hippias, a well-known polymath, claiming competence in everything from poetry, music, mathematics, and astronomy, to weaving handicrafts and mnemonic techniques. He is highly educated and a very well-known sophist, an itinerant teacher of the young both of Athens and of cities in Greece, a teacher who prepares them for public service and teaches ethical behavior. The dialogue begins with Hippias having delivered a speech on the topic of the fine pursuits which Nestor advises Neoptolemus, Achilles' son, to undertake after the fall of Troy. Although the big crowd has dwindled in number, Hippias agrees to answer questions, and Socrates obligingly asks one. Recognizing the competitive nature of this encounter, Hippias likens Socrates' questions to those he has been asked at the Olympic festivals, and he arrogantly boasts that he has never met anyone better than himself at anything. Socrates quickly cuts to the chase. He queries Hippias and his claim that Homer's portrayal of Achilles is a portrayal of the best of the Achaeans. Now, it's important to note, and Dr. Garland has already mentioned this, that in Athens, it is through poetry in a broad sense that one was trained to become a good citizen. Plato, in his Protagoras, writes that when children go to school, their teacher makes them learn by heart the words of good poets, in which there is much admonition, many stories and eulogies and praises of the good men of old, so that the child may eagerly imitate these and want to be like them. Poetry is studied for its ethical content, a point which Plato makes clear in his detailed critique of literature in the second and third books of the Republic. Although education was primarily the responsibility of the family, the Athenian state also made the recitation of Homeric epics a part of the most important state festival, the Great Panathenaea, thereby according the Homeric epics a foundational role in establishing Athenian identity. The poets were often cited as authorities on ethical matters, and even after the older system of education began to be replaced by the sophistical methods of new teachers, the interpretation of poetry, as seen in this dialogue, remained an essential component of a young man's education. Hippias, as I've mentioned, contends that Achilles is the best of the Achaeans. He describes him as the most straightforward and truthful, and opposes him to cunning Odysseus, the liar. It is on the basis of one piece of text from Book 9 of the Iliad that Hippias makes this claim. In Book 9, Odysseus, Phoenix, and Ajax have been sent by Nestor and Agamemnon as an embassy to Achilles in an attempt to entreat him to stay with the Achaeans and return to battle against the Trojans. Odysseus speaks first, very eloquently and persuasively, trying to get Achilles to stay. In his response, Achilles says, and I quote, "Zeus-born son of Laertes, inventive Odysseus, I must speak without restraint. As I will act and think, so it will be. And please do not sit muttering beside me. For as hateful to me as the gates of hell is the man who hides one thing in his heart and says another. But I shall speak, and so it will be." At this point, Achilles is still unmoved, and remains unmoved even after the second speaker, Phoenix, gives a very emotional speech, trying to convince him to stay. Ajax, his comrade in arms, is the last to speak. His speech is the shortest and most to the point. In his response to Ajax, Achilles says, "All this you seem to speak almost after my own heart." And it is at this point that Achilles agrees to stay with the Achaeans rather than return home to Phthia. This passage, according to Hippias, serves a twofold purpose, proving that Homer thought Achilles was true and straightforward in the Greek alethes tekai haplos. Haplos literally means simple, which I think is quite funny. And Odysseus, by contrast, is portrayed as cunning and speaking falsely, the Greek polutropos tekai pseudes. Hippias places great emphasis on the fact that Odysseus speaks untruths or conceals the truth, whereas Achilles is always forthright and despises such concealment.